All right. Good morning and welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad Podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I am your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. All right, folks, really quickly here. I'm a little run down today, a little sick, but the show must go on. So we're here. The show may be, I hesitate to say this because the moment I say it, it will not be true. But I have planned it this way. I intend for the show to be a little bit shorter today. But we will see. Now that I have said that, it's going to be like an hour and a half show. We'll see. But I'd actually, and the reason I'm telling you that, when I was looking at what am I going to talk about tomorrow, I had a bunch of topics and I thought, maybe I'll do another dad musings, where I kind of talk about like 4 or 5, whatever, different topics and just kind of go through them. And at first I was like, yeah, I'm going to do that. And then I woke up and I was like, oh, it's like my face and just voice and just passages. And I was just like, ugh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do all of that. And my thinking is just, how you get sick and your thinking is like, blah. People are like, what's your birthday? And you're like, my birthday? And they're like, yeah, your birthday. And you spend like a few seconds just trying to process what they said as opposed to just like, oh yeah, my birthday is this day. Or maybe that doesn't happen to you. But anyway, so I am not at my best today. Let's put it that way. Anyway, so we're going to talk a little bit about nationalizing elections. But before that, did you hear that Dan Bongino is back on the air? That's a big deal.
Oh no. Anyway,
did the audio not go through? I think the audio did not go through. Let me know if the audio on that went through or not. It was supposed to be funny. I didn't hear it in my ear. I think I know why. I think it went to you guys, but I don't think I heard it. But anyway, I'm trying to I show up to a show. I try to be funny on a day that I am not feeling well. Whatever. Anyway, so that is actually the source for today's show. So Dan Bongino invited Trump on his show. It was like his first day back yesterday at 10 a.m. And he talked about a bunch of things. And then he also had on the president. Okay, so that Liberty lady says, "I heard it." Yeah, so there's, like, a couple things yeah, just quickly here. Audio, if you're gonna podcast and you're gonna live stream and you're gonna, like, use audio and, like, mics and different videos and all this other stuff, just be prepared because the audio like, I find audio the most difficult thing to work with. But anyway, okay, so we're gonna get back to Dan Bongino. So he had Donald Trump on his show, and Donald Trump was talking about a whole bunch of things, but there's a clip going around about him, and he only suggested nationalizing the elections. So let's hear what he had to say, and then we're going to talk about it a little bit. So here we go. Here's Donald Trump on Dan Bongino's show.
Now, Minnesota, if they allowed us to do the job, it's a mess. There's something in the water up there, and I love the state. I won the state 3 times, but I got no credit for it. I won that state 3 times, but it's a rigged state, really rigged. The people are people that don't work. Those are the best ones. The people that came in, they don't work, and they don't want them either because they don't want to pay welfare. So they've sent all of their people, millions and millions of people. We have to get them out. And by the way, if Republicans don't get them out, you will never win another election as a Republican. If you don't get these people are all pitted, so they vote. And they make all this crap with the voting. Oh, well, you can vote, you can do whatever you want. It's crazy. I mean, it's crazy how you can get these people to vote. And if we don't get them out, Republicans will never win another election. Think of it. I won in a landslide. I won every swing state. I won the popular vote by millions. I won everything. I won a thing called counties. The counties I won, it's such a big vote. That's why the map was entirely red when you looked at it. It had 2 little purple lines and 2 blue lines on each side, but it was all red. And counties I won by 2,750. Think of this, to 550. 2,750 to 550. It's becoming a very good count because it's accurate. It covers the whole country. It's like a landslide. But you're never going to have that again if you don't get these people out. These people were brought to our country to vote, and they vote illegally. And amazing that the Republicans aren't tougher on it. The Republicans should say, we want to take over. We should take over the voting in at least 15 places. The Republicans ought to nationalize the voting. And we have states that are so crooked, and they're counting votes. We have states that I won that show I didn't win. Now you're going to see something in Georgia where they were able to get with a court order the ballots. You're going to see some interesting things come out. But, like the 2020 election, I won that election by so much. Everybody knows it.
Okay. Everybody knows it. I won this election by so much. It was red everywhere. Just I won. First of all, one of the things that makes Donald Trump's arguments not nearly as strong as he thinks they do, or he thinks they are, is that everything is the greatest, everything is the best. There is no such thing as, yeah, we just did an okay job here. We could do better. There's none of that. And the problem with that may be great if you're in real estate and you're buying and selling this building, and then next month if you've got a different building that you're dealing with, and then the month after that maybe you've got a different building. You've got different projects. And so you can kind of say that in a sense, and it might make sense because you've got a different building, you've got different people, there's just different things. So you could kind of carry on this attitude of everything is the greatest. But when you get into politics, the fact of the matter is we know that you don't always win. We know that sometimes an election or some action that you've done ends up being mediocre. And so when everything is great, nothing is great. Or let me put it to you in a let me use an analogy. I hate analogies in a sense because people seem to want a one-to-one exact analogy. But let me try to give you an analogy to illustrate why that's a problem. Many years ago, I used to have a girlfriend, and she would get angry at the drop of a dime. Not necessarily at me, just in general. She got angry. And one night we were trying to sleep, and some of our friends were in the living room, and they were carrying on. And it was like, I don't know, 1 a.m. in the morning, 2 a.m. in the morning, something like that. And she woke up, and I woke up, and then she went to go and yell at them. And I was like, no, hold up. I'll go. So I go in there to our friends and I'm just like, guys, really? We're trying to sleep in here and you're making so much noise. And I didn't like yell and scream. I just went in there and I was just, kind of like stern talking. And they all stopped and they just kind of stared at me. And again, I'm not yelling at them. I'm just talking kind of, I mean, maybe not like a calm voice like I'm doing now, but not yelling either. So somewhere in between, closer to calm. And what they did was they were like, we're sorry, we'll tone it down. And I was like, all right, cool. So I went back to bed. Now, the reason that I chose to go is because my girlfriend at the time would always get angry and it'd be like, oh, she's just angry again. Right? And people start dismissing you. If you're always angry, then nobody knows when to take it really serious. If everything is always great, then people don't know this one is serious. When you say everything is great, nothing can be mediocre, nothing can be just okay, then as far as I'm concerned, I start saying, yeah, that's just how they talk. Okay, yeah, you won every state. You won Minnesota 3 times, but you didn't get any credit for it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I hear you. Right? His diehard supporters will totally believe it. But we're not trying to convince the diehard supporters. We're trying to convince everybody else, which is quite a few people. And so I think this is the first problem that he has. He cannot help himself but to think of everything is great and fantastic. And so from my perspective, I'm like, yeah, whatever. Everything's great. So what? Because what I'm really saying is, I don't know when I should really take something serious for you. Now, are there election problems? Of course, there are election problems, and we should be seeking to address them. And I think it would be easier to address them if you could muster the willingness to say, yeah, maybe I didn't do so good in this state, but this state I totally did good. And this one's a problem. We need to focus on this one. Okay. So I think that's the first observation. The other observation, which I'm going to talk about more in here in a moment, is that he mentioned it twice in the clip that I played, but I think it was 3 times overall. He mentioned Republicans will never win again. And I think that's a bit of fear mongering. I mean, I want you to think about something. He claims this. Let's just walk through this logically. He claims the 2020 election was stolen. Now, I'm not going to argue, yes, it was, no, it wasn't. I'm not going to. Let's just assume for a moment it was. Okay. What happened to the 2024 election? How is that not stolen? Like, what things did Because I want you to remember, he went to the courts. He tried to get the courts to say, yeah, you won the election or whatever. And he tried to get this and and all of these ways, he was never able to resolve, right? And then also any of the claims like, oh, there were extra ballots here, none of those have been actually resolved. They've been claims, but nobody's actually done anything to change what might have happened. So we literally have the same infrastructure for our voting in 2024 as we did in 2020. And so for me, I look at it and I say, well, if the election was stolen in 2020, how is it you weren't able to steal it in 2024, whoever that person is or entity, if you will? So for me, I look and I say, this doesn't really make any sense. Again, that's not to say that there weren't problems, perhaps even massive problems. Although personally, I look at it and I say, I don't think he's proved his case. And I think everywhere he went to prove his case that didn't include diehard supporters failed. Okay. But okay, it was stolen. How did you win it back? What you just got on social media and you were tougher on social media and Elon Musk bought Twitter and so you were able to get around it. Well, apparently, then why do you need to nationalize things? Right? Like if you were able to wrangle back the election the next go around, then perhaps nationalizing it is a bad idea just on the simple fact that you don't need to do that. That's kind of like a nuclear option. So, but we're going to talk about this fear mongering because I think there's a lot of fear mongering going on out in the world today. And every time I get on social media, and this is a small little tangent, I won't stay on it very long, but I noticed that a lot of right wingers, if you criticize any ideas, they're like, oh, you want the communists to win. It's like they've got this Red Scare 2.0. So you've got the communists that are out there, you've got election stealers, you've got people, trying to change the demographics. We hear about how white people are just not, there's not going to be any white people. They're going to be all minorities and, however many years. It's just fear, 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 fear. And I don't really like the idea of running a nation on the basis of fear. We do what's right, period. When you operate on the basis of fear, sometimes you do bad things because you're so worried that fear overtakes you and you make bad decisions. So we're going to talk about this fear mongering in a second, but first, let's talk about what the Constitution has to say about this. Okay? Because nationalization would likely face a constitutional challenge. Article 1, Section 4 grants Congress the authority to regulate, quote, times, places, and manner of federal elections. This has been interpreted as supplemental to state control, not a complete takeover. Okay, supplemental. But here's the full clause. It says the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. But the Congress may at any time, by law, make or alter such regulations except as to the places of choosing senators. Okay, and this is again from Article 1, Section 4, Clause 1. I would argue that the full federalization would violate the 10th Amendment by encroaching on reserved state powers, requiring a constitutional amendment for any nationalization of the federal elections to be lawful rather than just mere legislation. Like that's the way I look at it. Now, what's interesting is I'm going to read this to you, and this actually comes from, I think it's called so you go to constitution.congress.gov and they've got Constitution annotated. This is from our own government now. Okay, I just want to point that out. I'm not going to put it up on the screen. So they have this. You can go through the Constitution and you can click on the sections, and then they will have annotations so that you can read a little bit more about it. And they're kind of lengthy, and I'm not going to try to read it all to you. I'm just going to read this one little section. It said, by providing Congress power to preempt state election procedures, the framers sought to prevent states from thwarting the federal government's operation by using state law to manipulate or preclude elections for the House of Representatives. So it's very interesting that according to our own government, that the concern here is manipulating elections for the House of Representatives, for Congress. That was the concern. But the concern here that Trump is presenting is, oh, we'll never win another election again if we don't federalize or nationalize the elections. Well, it's like, wait a minute. What you're really saying is you might never win the presidency. And perhaps that's true. But I should remind people that the presidency should be one of the least powerful positions in some respects. In totality of all the power that is granted, it should be the least. There are some areas where the power is great. But in totality, Congress is supposed to have the majority of the power. I mean, I want you to think about this for a second. The House of Representatives has things like the power of the purse. They initially were set up so that people would vote for representatives, and then our state legislatures would vote for their senators. Of course, the 17th Amendment changed that. So ultimately, the way that our system of governance was designed was checks and balances on everything. But I find it interesting, and we would have to dig in and see if there were, did the framers have more concern for Congress? Was there more concern for elections being thwarted for the president? I'm going to go with the annotation here and say it's likely that they were more concerned about Congress because You have many more people there, and Congress in totality has more power. I want to think of it this way. Let's say Congress drafts any piece of legislation, it doesn't matter, and it passes the House, moves on to the Senate, passes the Senate, it goes on to the president's desk. And the president says, nah, I'm not signing this. Or I'm not, he's going to veto it. So he vetoes it, sends it back to Congress. It's not over. Congress can override that veto with a 3/4 vote. So they can, is it 3/4? I'm drawing a blank right now. I'm pretty sure it's 3/4. But if it's 2/3, I apologize. But they can override his veto. And then guess what? It's end of story. That's it. Like the president doesn't have a veto that in full overrides Congress. So I'm going to argue that the checks and balances in this particular case, where it's given to the states, is specifically dealing with, or primarily dealing with, Congress, not the presidency. And more importantly, we as a society, we should look at the presidency as actually one of the weaker elections, or maybe weaker is not a good term, but one of the lesser elections federally. We should be more focused on our senators, because our senators are supposed to represent our state, right? I know we vote on them, but they're supposed to represent our state. That's why each state has two, exactly equal. But then our House of Representatives, well, each state they vary because the populations vary. And so based on your population. And it is true that all of this whole argument is really all about elections. So we're going to talk about that. We're gonna discuss that. Now, I want to point out a few other issues with this, okay? Because the first problem is that you've got constitutional challenge, okay? A full federalization could violate the 10th Amendment by encroaching on reserved state powers, and we just read it, right? We just read it that it said state powers. Let's look at it again, okay? It says shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature. Okay, the voting is managed by the state. But then they carve out a little provision and say, well, Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations. Okay, so they can alter some regulation. But if they want to nationalize it, take it over in full, that requires an amendment to the Constitution. All right. Joe's correcting me, says 2/3 of both chambers. Thank you, Joe. Sometimes I'm just not on my A game. So, some other issues that are, just in general, okay, that I think we should consider. Again, we're talking about undermining the state's rights, or what I would prefer to say, sovereignty, okay? Elections have long been a state prerogative, allowing for localized administration that reflects diverse regional needs and preferences. Nationalizing them would erode this balance, concentrating power in Washington, D.C., and diminishing the ability of states to innovate or tailor election rules to their citizens. I focus on the part where I said concentrating power in Washington. So everybody's out there talking like, when we argue about immigration and people are like, oh, but Donald Trump had a mandate, for which I disagree with. I mean, I don't disagree that people voted for him to do something about immigration. I disagree with the idea that, well, the president has a mandate, so therefore every governing body below him has to fall in line. Well, no, those governing bodies also have mandates. So like I've pointed out in the past, Tim Walz, he won his election in Minnesota to governor with a higher percentage than did Kamala win against Trump in the 2024 election. I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but if you look up and you say, okay, Minnesota, what percentage did Kamala Harris win? Because she won Minnesota. What percentage did she win? Well, her percentage for that election was actually lower than the percentage that Tim Walz won his gubernatorial election, re-election. So if Trump has a mandate by percentage over the whole U.S., then and if that's the argument that we're going to make, which I think is I don't buy it in total, but I think there's a fair argument to be made so long as we include all the other elections and we say, well, if a governor won their election, then they have a mandate. If a mayor won their election, then they have a mandate. If a congressman won their election, they have a mandate. In fact, Trump recently tweeted out, and I don't have it in front of me to read to you, but he was criticizing Thomas Massie once again. And he basically said that Thomas Massie was disloyal to him, the president, and to the Republican Party. But that's funny because the Republican Party members of the Republican Party, but the party itself did not vote for Thomas Massie. The president, as president, did not vote for Thomas Massie. Individuals did. The members of his district did. Actually, Donald Trump didn't at all. Um, so he can only be disloyal to his constituents. And if he said, I'm going to go to Congress and here is the basis under which I will make my votes, and he makes those votes on that basis, then he is disloyal to no one. And see, this is the problem that the problem that I'm bringing forward to you is to say people voted for Trump to drain the swamp, yet he keeps doing things that concentrate power in Washington, D.C., or grow the swamp. If you suggest, hey, nationalize the elections, which is a conversation we could have, and I will oppose, but we can have that conversation. That concentrates power in Washington, D.C. That is not draining the swamp. That is not the mandate that he was allegedly given. So if supporters want to say, well, he's got a mandate to do immigration, okay, he's also got a mandate to drain the swamp. How come you're not jumping up and down on that one? Right? Like, and that arguably that's more important because Washington, D.C., what goes on there affects the whole nation. If you've got some Somalians, a bunch of Somalians up in Minnesota, and they've got like their, little Mogadishu or whatever they want to call it, like area where they're concentrated, and some things happen there. Guess what? I'm in Florida. That doesn't bother me. I mean, it doesn't happen. It doesn't harm me what they do, right? Same thing for the Haitians in Ohio and wherever else we've got, pockets of immigrants. It affects that area. It doesn't affect people outside of the area. So either we were serious about draining the swamp or we're not. That's really what it boils down to. A second issue is that you run the risk of government abuse and tyranny because centralizing election control creates a single point of failure that's vulnerable to corruption, manipulation, and even partisan capture. I want you to think about that for just a second. What I just say, I said Donald Trump had a mandate to go and drain the swamp, and now he's suggesting that maybe the swamp gets the control of the elections. Okay, by nationalizing them. I mean, he didn't say like, hey, maybe they should go and pass a legislation for one time, or to kind of resolve a couple of issues. He didn't say anything like that. He said we should nationalize it. Okay. If the elections in various states are corrupt, what is his argument that Washington, D.C. is any less corrupt? What is that argument? Because nobody's going to believe that. So we know that there are states, at least some states, many states, for which we're not complaining about. All the red states, of course. So think about that for a second. You've got 50 states, and you've got however many states that you don't see a problem in. Let's just say 40. Let's say 40 states. We're going to make up a number. 40 states, there are no major election problems. Like they're not complaining and saying, hey, the election was stolen from me. So then you have 10. So you have 10 out of 50 that are bad versus 1 out of 1. Like that's the problem that we run the risk literally of government abuse and tyranny. And the federal government we've got the Epstein files, we've got Doge, all that money. We've got just on and on and on. The federal government abuses power left and right. And I don't mean like partisan left and right. I just mean, just every time you turn around, they're abusing power somehow. And so, is that the entity that we really want to be managing our elections? The entity that's supposed to be drained, the entity that we all have agreed upon is full of abuse and tyranny and corruption, but somehow this is the idea that's a good idea. A federal bureaucracy overseeing all elections that could more easily impose uniform standards that suppress voter choice, enable surveillance, and favor one political faction, obviously being the one that's in power. So this goes back to the argument that a lot of people on the right are refusing to hear right now, which is if you take this power and you expand it or you give it to an entity that once didn't have it, like the federal government, when your opponents get into power, they will use it against you. I didn't say if, I said when. When. Because the Democrats, the left, they will be in power again. There's a strong possibility they will have more power this year in the 2026 midterm elections. It's not looking good for Republicans. I know there's been a few people that come out and they're like, "Oh, the midterms, we're totally on track." No, you're not. Stop lying to yourself and stop lying to voters. Right now, you are on track to lose. Period. This also, I think, contradicts the founders' intent to divide powers to prevent any one entity from dominating. And I just read that from the annotation. By providing Congress power to preempt state election procedures, the framers sought to prevent states from thwarting the federal government's operation by using state law to manipulate or preclude elections for the House of Representatives. Okay, so it is another interesting point here out of that statement. By using state law, that was kind of their purpose. That's what it says on our government's page. Our own government is saying, like, hey, the founders, the framers, they did not want the states using laws to take authority or to manipulate, our system of governance in misuse it. So they offered this like caveat, and they're like, all right, Congress can override them by legislation. The last problem, I think, is that it ignores regional diversity and local accountability. Now that one gets a little tricky because first people might go, "Oh, you think California should allow, Mexicans, who have crossed the border and live there in large numbers to vote?" No. I want you to think of it this way. A one-size-fits-all federal system would fail to address unique context. For example, rural versus urban voting, the logistics of that. And there are other areas. I'm not going to try to list them all. I think that one sufficiently kind of identifies that there are some areas where the rules are tailored to the demographics, the legitimate, if you will, demographics for those out there watching that it might be like, well, you're talking about immigrants? No. Or illegal, non-citizens, put it that way. So, no, I'm not talking about non-citizens, whether they're legal or illegal immigrants, okay? I'm talking about the actual body of citizens. We vary. And the states can adjust their rules accordingly to manage and best suit their voters. And I think that's a good thing. The whole idea of this experiment of the United States was sovereignty. It was sovereignty with the states, and it is slowly being eroded. And the only thing that people can see is, oh my God, we might not win the next election. We better go do this dramatic thing so that we'll win the election, or we need to at least suggest it. And in my opinion, we need to start holding our representatives accountable for two things. Number one, for what they do. We don't do that already so well, but we should. The second thing, which is a little trickier, is that we should hold them accountable for the things that they suggest. If you Imagine it this way: like all the right wingers out there are always like, "Oh, the commies are gonna take over. They're gonna get into power. The leftists, blah blah blah." Okay, fine. Let's take that for example. Imagine imagine that somebody on the left, they're a democratic socialist, and they're like, "Yeah, I want to implement all these socialist ideas." I mean, that could never happen as a mayor or something. I don't know, but let's just say that did happen. Everybody that's on the right is going to flip out. And they're going to be like, oh no, we got to stop this guy. This is terrible. We can't have this. Oh, that's interesting. You'll do it for the commie, but you won't do it when your own side does it and says, hey, you know, we're going to do this thing. It could be a bad idea, but it's our side, so it's okay. You see the problem here? We're not being consistent. We're going to lose our republic because people are being foolish. They're being so drawn into fear mongering that they're making bad decisions and they're looking at things in the wrong context. I think we may be past the point of no return with our constitution. I have said before, and I'm pretty positive that I'm not willing to take it back yet. We are in a post constitutional world. You know, we're a post constitutional country. We're past it. We gave it up. We still have it and we appeal to it when it fits our narrative. But there's not a lot of appeal to the Constitution when it doesn't fit your narrative, when it's an outcome or even the hint of an outcome that you may not like. We're not so good at it. I mean, we've got right now the right out there basically making all of the left's arguments against the Second Amendment. And then we have the left making arguments that the right used to make. This is insane. It's crazy. So, what is the answer? Well, I've previously offered one, and people don't like it. Okay, and my answer to that was okay. And what is that? Let's be clear. My answer to problems with the elections, with allegedly illegal people. I hate saying illegal people because I don't think of like I understand that it means people being here without permission, but it just feels like saying like hey, almost like you're saying like human contraband. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't really believe that people inherently are illegal. Maybe there's status here. So anyway, but if we're talking about illegal votes, okay, that's really the core problem. Well, Rand Paul came out with one. Now, he came out with an idea. I don't know when I don't. He was on the. I'm going to play it for you in a second. He was on the Joe Rogan podcast, and he kind of lays it out, and it's very similar to my idea that I presented, which I said, look, I think we need to offer amnesty, which I understand is a 4-letter word. People don't like hearing it. They're like, nah, they get all crazy. But I say offer amnesty, and then I say that amnesty comes with a hitch. You've got, and we could argue the merits of how many years, but like you got 10 years. And within 10 years, if we find out that you've committed a violent crime here in the US or in your home country, we're going to deport you. And the reason I said that is because whether you're talking to like say 12 million, immigrants that are here illegally, or you're talking 40 million, whichever number you want to use, it's all going to be a huge demand on our resources, whatever you do. So I said, well, maybe what we need to do is make it super easy and then stretch out over time so that you don't have to try to implement, utilize all these resources all at once. Because the truth of the matter is you're not going to, no matter which direction you go, you are not going to 100% implement any idea that resolves it in a short amount of time. Doesn't matter, right? You're gonna have issues if you just give amnesty to everybody and say, all right, we're also going to give you citizenship, right? If you went that drastic route, you're going to be like, all right, well, we've got all this paperwork, we've got all these things to do, got all this blah blah blah. You're going to have a lot of resources. And if you say we're going to kick everybody out, and before the Democrats can get reelected again, okay, one, that's mathematically not even possible. But let's just say it was. You're going to just get a huge drain on resources. So how do we deal with that? Well, I said, well, maybe we offer the amnesty, and then After that, we say, all right, 10 years, you've got it. If we can't find anything, and that gives us 10 years to deal with everybody, to go through and check out databases, get people processed. We're not in a rush. We can do it correctly. If somebody's got a violent crime or there's an allegation of a violent crime, then we have time to deal with it. Is it the absolute best 100% utopian answer that's going to solve all of our problems and not have any? No. But what I think it is, because the fact of the matter is people are here. You have to deal with it somehow. So I look at it and I say, what is the most practical way of dealing with this? And I also try to answer the question of what kind of society do we actually say we want? Now, ultimately, the big concern about the elections, that concern is that we're going to flip. We're going to flip from red to blue or whatever, right? And that's a fair concern. If you are a Republican and you are like, I don't want mass immigration because this area that's been red for many years could quickly flip to blue, that's a fair and reasonable concern. That's reasonable. If it's not, if it's because we've imported a bunch of people intentionally to kind of flip it to blue. However, if it flips to blue because the red team was managing so poorly, well, that's just too bad. So let's play Rand Paul's answer here. Because he gives a slightly different answer than mine, and I was like, I think this might work. I think this could be a good solution. So let's hear what he had to say.
You're going to shock you. I'm a moderate on this. I actually think that most of the people that are here and working lawfully and can pass a background check, I would give them no welfare, and I'd give them no citizenship, no voting privileges, but you can work and we won't arrest you.
Okay. No citizenship, but a potential path to citizenship?
I think it's better just to say the trade-off is this, that you came illegally. Right now the law says you got to go back and you'll never get in, basically. So the compromise is you came in illegally, you just don't get to be a citizen, your kids will be. Now the new ones, the 8 million that might have come in last year, some of them need to go back, and particularly any of them committing crimes. The compromise I'm offering is different than anybody's ever talked about. Everybody thinks the compromise has to include voting and citizenship. If in Texas we gave amnesty and let, I don't know, a couple million people vote, immediately Texas becomes Democrat for the next 20 years. So that's what it's all about. It's
Right.
about voting. I think some of the best Americans just got here, frankly. They have good work ethic. They're hardworking people. They work in our fields. They pick our tomatoes. They clean fish. They work in chicken houses. They do a lot of the dirty jobs in our country are done by immigrants. So
They also came here with ambition because they want a better life at
Right.
great peril, at great risk.
And some of them are here illegally. I would have a work program. I'd let them sign up for a work program, pass a background check.
But do you think that they should have to go back home in order to become a citizen? Like if you could show, like if some
no, I
guy
just
came
wouldn't-
over here 20 years ago, started off as a laborer, now he's a carpenter, he's working for some construction company, but he's an illegal.
Right.
Like,
Now, the trade is you don't get citizenship at all. Your kids will. I would just say you don't get citizenship. That's your trade-off. Here's an interesting survey. Let's find 1,000 people who are in Texas illegally and do a poll and say, would you accept this? Would you accept that you don't get to vote during your lifetime, but your kids will get to vote if they were born here in exchange for not having to worry about being in a car accident or being sent back to Mexico? I'll bet you 80% of the people here illegally would take work without citizenship. But you know who wants the citizenship and doesn't care about work? Democrats. All they care about is the voting part.
Okay. I think his answer resolves some of these problems, right? Does it do it in full? No. Will there still be problems? Yes. Would it resolve this issue of, hey, maybe the idea is nationalizing our elections? Absolutely, it would, because we keep it within the states, right? And if the concern really is about the election, okay, who gets to vote, then I'm going to make the argument that by granting amnesty to people, you put a better spotlight on who is in this country. And you can better, and I hate to say this as a libertarian, this pains me to say it. It feels like, those movies where they're like, the guy's like trying to say I love you, and you just can't see him. But I feel like almost like that. But damn, I went on that tangent. Now I forgot what I was going to say. I'm trying to make jokes and try to be a little funny while I'm not feeling well. But it makes it easier for government to track you. See what I mean? That's a terrible word to say. But the point is, the government knows who I am. They have some record of me, right? All the records are not so accurate. I'll tell you about that in a second. But they know who I am. I can go and I can say, here's my birth certificate, and it's from this place, St. Mary's Hospital, West Palm Beach, Florida. I can go to them and I can say, here's my military service record, and they have all this information about me, right? So they know I am fully documented, and this my local community here, Duval County. They can tell you how many times I've voted. They can't tell you what I voted, how I voted, but they can tell you how many times I showed up. Because when I showed up, I give them my ID, they scan it, and then they register it. And they're like, yeah, DL voted in this election. So they could tell you how many times I voted. So, and all I'm saying here is I don't like the idea of surveillance, and I definitely don't like it at the federal level. I abhor it. State level is bad enough, but I understand that you're going to have some level of oversight into people. Hey, if you're checking IDs before you vote, then you're going to verify that the person, the ID is legitimate. You're going to put it in a system somewhere. It's going to record it, so on and so forth. All that's already happening with Americans. So why not have it happen with immigrants that are here and say, all right, and they can, if an immigrant who has been granted amnesty comes in and they try to vote, they can turn them down and say, sorry, you are not registered to vote, or, you can't vote. You're here on this program, this amnesty program. You can't vote. And then they can document this person tried to vote, right? And look, I think we have the SAVE Act out there. I'm not a huge fan of it, but I get it. I think that according to the Constitution, what we just read, that Congress could say, all right, for the purposes of ensuring that only the people that are supposed to be voting do vote, they could offer some legislation that says, hey, you have to document, this, or you have to do this. They can offer some additional rules, and I think that would be constitutional. But nationalizing it, I think, is a bad idea for all the reasons that I just gave you. And I don't think that it actually addresses the real core problem, okay? Because I think it opens up additional issues, so we end up having basically the same problem, different swamp, okay? Perhaps Minnesota fudged some stuff. I doubt it. Based on what's going on up there, seems to me that they're pretty left. So the fact that Kamala Harris won, not very surprising. The fact that, Kamala Harris won in California, not very surprising, right? You can argue the swing states, people move, blah, 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 all this other stuff. We could have those arguments every other election or every election. But I think ultimately, if the core problem is, hey, we've got people that are in our country and they're voting and they're not supposed to be voting, number one, the best way I think is for Congress to write some legislation and say, hey, look, we got to tighten this up a little bit. Okay. Tighten it up. That's fine. Okay. You states, you're still managing it, but we're going to add, an additional layer of rules because of the situation that we're currently in right now. That would be constitutional. Depending on the legislation would depend on whether or not I support it. I would have to read it first. But the idea of it, I would support. I do not support nationalizing the elections because I think that just takes all the corruption and puts it into somewhere where we know is a hotbed of corruption. And it takes all of the states where there isn't so much corruption or there's not the claims of corruption at that level. I mean, I think every state has some level of corruption going on, right? Somebody fudges something here. Maybe they do it for, because they're trying to be sneaky and get a particular outcome. Maybe they're just trying to, like this person has an extenuating circumstance and someone's trying to help them out, and just, like, all right, you seem like an American. I'm going to try to help you. Like there could be any number of reasons that are going on. But ultimately, I think what you're doing is you're centralizing your corruption That's ultimately what you're doing. And you're not really this doesn't really give you the society you want, because beyond the elections, beyond blue and red and, whatever, ultimately ask yourself, what society are we trying to build? Right? Rand Paul mentions in there, he says there's a lot of people that come here with the intent of working. They want to work. And then Joe Rogan was like, yeah, they've got a lot of ambition. Isn't that the kind of immigrant that you say you want here? Isn't it the case that if an immigrant comes over here, works really hard, let's say they work 60 hours a week, and they work for somebody else. They save up all their money. They don't spend much money. Maybe they live practically in poverty so they can save their money. Then they get married. They have a family. Then they create their own store. And I know this is not going to be the case for every single immigrant, right? But they do those kind of things. And then they offer a donut shop or whatever in your local community. Isn't that the kind of immigrant that you're asking for? Well, then why are we bending to fear as opposed to saying, this is the ultimate outcome I'm looking for. Let's figure out the solution that gets us there, right? And I think I know people don't like hearing it, and I will stand by it, and people can come at me, but I think amnesty actually accomplishes that. I think if you go with Rand Paul's solution, you could arguably say that's better than mine, because he's like, look, you're not getting citizenship, you're just getting legal status, so we don't have to deal with that. And you could still implement my argument where I say, look, in 10 years, if we find out that that you've committed a violent crime here or in your home country, before you came here, then we're going to remove you. And that will include any family members that you have, right? You could have that provision. I'm not big on deporting people, but when it comes to violent crimes, I will support that. And I think this would give us a little bit of breathing room to really look for who are the actual violent criminals. Let's deal with those. I don't have the video for it, but I'll tell you about it. Years ago, in 2012, the founder of the Libertarian Party was running for Senate, I think in Arizona, and he was running against John McCain. I think it was Arizona, and the topic of immigration came up, and he was asked. He was like, "All right, with all of these illegal immigrants coming in, what would you do? How do you solve this?" And he said, "Look, I think we need to streamline the process, offer amnesty, and then deal with the violent criminals. Basically, step away from trying to go and find all the people that crossed the border illegally and are showing up at Home Depot to repair somebody's window or renovate somebody's bathroom. Skip those people and go find the violent criminals." Deal. He needs to wrap it up and go take a nap. My own audience is against me. So anyway, he basically said, let's shift our resources away from going after everyone and go after the people that we really, really don't want here. That's our answer. And then offer ourselves a pathway for all the people that are the people that we say we want here. And then give us a little bit of a provision to deal with it if they've lied. I think that's pretty simple. And I'm going to skip my story since my own audience is telling me to get the heck out of here. So that's what I've got. Let's go check out some comments in the live chat. Let's see here. Boom, bada bang. There we are. All right, let's see what we got. Boom. We got kind of Bongino is a tool. Yeah, he is. Like, made all that noise before he got his position and then comes back and was like, well, I saw these files. If you knew what I knew, you wouldn't be making. What a tool. Let's see. Didn't special election in Texas go from red to blue? It did. I don't know any of the details, but it did. And presumably, it was a legitimate election. And they legitimately lost. Let's see. That's what Republicans do, is fearmonger. They say Democrats do that. Both of them do, actually. It just depends on which one's in power. When one's in power and the other one is getting a little bit of leverage, you're like, oh my God, this guy is falling. Let's see here. What else we got here? What else we got in here? Yes, there is a silent protest going on here in Jacksonville. I do not have the details pulled up, but you can go to the Libertarian Party of Duval County's page, and they're getting a lot of comments. A lot of people, I think they've upset some people, but that's okay. But there is a silent ICE protest. I believe it's outside of the Immigration Center, the Immigration Building in downtown Jacksonville. So you can go check that out. I don't remember the times off the top of my head, but there's actually two of them, I believe. I think one of them is at the Immigration Center. I think there's a more formal name today at like 2:00 or something like that. And then after that, I think the people or the person organizing is going to be at City Council to talk as well. Let's see here. Let's see here. It's all about the silent protest in my opinion. You'll see D on there too. Lots of bootlicking. Oh yeah. Let's see what else we got here. Morning, Liberty Dad team. Addison, morning to you as well. Addison is the one that is overseeing this protest. So, find her, and I think her details to contact her are on the flyer that was posted by the Libertarian Party of Duval County. Lots of comments here. Let's see what else. Dirty jobs like slaves used to do. Well, I mean, kind of. I mean, there are some jobs that are just dirty. You know what I mean? And I wouldn't call it. I mean, yes, in some sense, yes, like slaves, but I don't think that immigrants are necessarily being treated like slaves per se. Are they being taken advantage of? Illegal immigrants? Yes, I would say that they are taken advantage of, and I think that also resolves that issue, right? Let's see. Free trade works across borders. Free trade across borders works. Yes, it does. Let's see. Let's see. I think that is all. All right. Protest info. Okay, so here's the protest info. I will read it out loud, and then we'll head on out of here. Tuesday, February 3rd. That is today, from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. That's outside of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services building. It's a public sidewalk, 4121 South Point Boulevard, Jacksonville, Florida, 32216. So, and I would post it up on the screen, but I cannot. I can only show the comments in a weird, goofy way. So that's what it is. Yeah, there you are. All right, folks. That is my show today. Hope you enjoyed it. We got past it, even though I was a little sick, and I ran over longer than I intended. I thought it was going to be more like 30, 40 minutes, but we're here at an hour, and that's okay. Anyway, I will see you guys tomorrow with another episode of Human Frequency with my co-host, Christina Lucastro. So until then, stay safe, guard your liberty. I'll see you tomorrow.
You know that I'm all about supporting organizations that hold my values. Make sure you head on over to blackgunsmatter.shop. They've got apparel, stickers, and more. Use the code LibertyDad, all one word, at checkout to score a 10% discount. Or just hit the referral link in the show notes. That'll make it so much easier. Remember, I'm not just a voice on a mic. I'm a dad who's working hard to deliver to you the best libertarian content. Connect with me on Linktree, where you'll find links to my Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee, because, every bit helps keep this show rolling. Plus, you can find me on my other platforms to stay in the loop. With your help, this show, The Message of Liberty, will be seen and heard by more people. As always, I appreciate you tuning in and look forward